So, Ari, the danger, I guess, to voting rights that the Trump administration represents is, I don't want to say infinite, but it's quite large, right? I mean, Jeff Sessions is a guy who has now confirmed, who has had a career of being hostile not only to voting rights, particularly, it seems, for African Americans, but also hostility for people who are actually trying to help people vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Trump administration's threat to democracy and to voting is an existential one. We've never had a president who's believed in so many debunked conspiracy theories about voter fraud. We've never had an attorney general who's been so hostile to civil rights and voting rights in the modern era. We've never had aides like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller who seem to be feeding Trump this stuff. And you add that up to everything else that's going on in the country, and it's very, very alarming. And so I think that, partly I think why Trump started lying about voter fraud was because his ego was bruised, because he lost such a popular vote. But I also think there was an ulterior motive for many in his administration, which is they're trying to set up this commission to investigate voter fraud, and they're talking about the issue because they know that will then lay the groundwork for them to implement policies that make it harder to vote. And so that's the end goal here. It's not just about Trump's conspiracy theories. It's not just about his bruised ego, that there's a calculated strategy at work to try to suppress as many votes as possible, knowing very well that Trump is already an historically unpopular president.
All right, let's try and disaggregate this a little bit, because I think it's important to understand these different motives and the different people who are pushing it. Because, let's go back, though, before we do that, to the scandal that took place in the Bush administration, where you had Karl Rove was highly politicizing the Justice Department by leaning on specific U.S. attorneys around the country to find examples or to drum up or generate or, even in some ways, I think, create examples of voter fraud to delay this same predicate, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing, is that this game plan that you're talking about, there may be different sort of aspects. On some level, there's equality in the Trump administration, like it was going to Iraq, right? The one thing we could all agree on was, to spread democracy or whatever it is. And they have that dynamic going on in the Trump administration in terms of voter suppression. The Bush administration ran this whole thing before, where they lay the predicate and then they come in with these laws.
They did, and so that you're right. There is a precedent for this. The Bush Justice Department under John Ashcroft first off started talking a lot about voter fraud, a lot more about voter fraud than any previous administration. They began major investigations. They did a 5-year investigation into illegal voting. They found very, very few cases of actual that they could prosecute. They didn't find a single case of voter impersonation, which is what they were really looking for, because this was the time when there were the first voter ID laws were really being passed, and Georgia and Indiana and Arizona and other states was in the middle of the Bush years, and Karl Rove, we know, was leaning very hard on U.S. attorneys in New Mexico and Missouri and Washington and elsewhere to prosecute cases of voter fraud, to give the Bush administration the narrative they needed to pass more restrictive voting laws. Now, those U.S. attorneys didn't find any cases of voter fraud to prosecute. They were all Republican U.S. attorneys. They didn't find any cases, and so they were fired as a result, and that really became what was known as Attorneygate. Now, I think this is much worse under Trump, because now you have a situation where the entire Republican Party is invested in voter suppression efforts. Remember, in the Bush years, we just were seeing the beginning of things like voter ID. Now we're seeing state after state after state start passing these restrictions. And in my latest piece for The Nation, what I say is that while Trump is lying about voter fraud, 21 states now are considering new restrictions on voting. So even if Trump said nothing about this, Republicans in the states would be pushing to make it harder to vote. But now that Trump is raising the specter, you have the federal government getting involved. You're going to have Republicans in Congress who are going to get involved. And that's what makes it so scary, is the alignment between the fact that you're going to have, the executive branch, you're going to have the states, you're going to have Congress, and then most likely the courts, which are going to be filled with Trump appointees soon enough, that will try to uphold these laws. And so I don't think we've really seen a threat this serious in a very long time.
So, in other words, there's no checks and balances here. I mean, we have sort of a full-throated agenda to suppress votes, and the impetus, it seems, comes from different places. I mean, I think and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like you could spread out the motivation across maybe three different areas. One is founded in a certain amount of racism, and then another is simply a partisanship, I guess, and then the third is just full-on bat crap crazy, right? I mean, that's where I think Donald Trump genuinely believes this stuff. He must.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to know Trump's motives. I mean, what we do know is that he believes basically any conspiracy theory possible. I mean, so whether it's vaccines cause autism, or Muslims were cheering in New Jersey on 9/11, or anything that's been debunked, Trump seems to believe it. So maybe that's part of what's driving it. But I also think that a number of other Republicans are much more cynical about this, and they've really manufactured a controversy over fraud. They've admitted it at various points in time, so they can push policies to make it harder to vote. And it's really interesting because we had this situation where the Trump administration, Trump said, well, thousands of people were illegally busted from Massachusetts to New Hampshire, which was the latest conspiracy theory that he was pushing, which has been pushed by Scott Brown.
We should say he announced this to a room full of senators days ago. I mean, so this is not something that he's whispering in corners and people are reporting like he's still talking.
No, he said it to senators. According to a review, an article in Political, there was an uncomfortable silence in the room. So, I mean, based on this reporting, at least, it seems like no senators actually challenged him on this, which is quite distressing. So because there were 6 Democratic senators in the room at the time. But then we had Stephen Miller get on the Sunday shows and repeat this, and basically, he didn't have any evidence because there was no evidence to back this up. But nonetheless, he was talking about this. But what's disturbing about it is that even as all these people are fact-checking it, Republicans in New Hampshire have introduced 40 bills in the current legislative session to make it harder to vote. So they want to get rid of same-day registration. They want to make you have to register your car and get an in-state ID to be able to vote. They want to do all of these tweaks. They want to make you pledge that you'll live in the state for the, quote, foreseeable future, which makes it that college students might not be able to vote if they decide to leave New Hampshire after they graduate. So this is what's really scary here. It's not the rhetoric. It's the actual policies that are being developed as we really speak. And I think that part of the story is largely being lost by people.